Hi guys. All right, so we've just looked at the first part of 1917, or what I've delivered it up to, which was January to March. Now we're looking at March to September. We're going to look at, the kind of mainly the return of Lenin and the changes to the Bolshevik Party and its policy, and also the first, as I've kind of put here, the first kind of creaking movement of the provisional government. So, this government's brought to power off the back of a revolution which is full of hope, is full of progress for the future, hope of progress for the future, sorry, and, large swathes of people that have obviously really had nothing delivered to them due to autocracy for a very long time. So they're asking for a lot of things, and the provisional government, it starts to creak and slowly begins to crumble under this pressure, which is a shame. Anyway, we mustn't make judgments about history. We just take it as it happened. So what happens then? So before we get into it, just so we're clear, the Soviet has many different names. It can be simply called the Soviet, or its full name, the Petrograd Soviet of Workers and Soldiers Deputies, or it could be referred to more specifically as the Central Executive Committee, which can also be known as the Executive Committee, or the Russian name for both of those things, which is Ispolkom. Again, Russian history can be quite confusing in this way. So if you see any mention to these things, it basically means the Soviet in the Taurida Palace, in the left, the left wing of it, and the decisions that it was making on behalf of the soldiers and the workers and the people. So what happens to Soviets then once this one's established? Well, the first thing is that we get Soviets in places of greater importance. So we very soon get a Soviet in Moscow, which is just to demonstrate how loose, the control, how the provisional government had such loose control over the new republic now, because the Moscow Soviet, it passes a decree for an 8-hour day, and it's adopted in the city, and there's nothing. It bypasses the provisional government. They can do nothing about this. Similarly, in Saratov, the province that used to be ruled by Stolypin, which this particular Soviet is made up of 60% workers. So remember, a Soviet as a council, as a representation of an area. It could be an area, or obviously with factories, it's going to be mostly workers, but in this regard, there are a lot more workers than soldiers in Saratov, and it doesn't work in relation to dual power there. It actually, when it shows how fragile this dual power system was, because it just starts ruling for itself, which kind of sets a precedent which is used or questioned by the people. But point is, Soviets springing up everywhere. Kronstadt has its own Soviet. Riga in Latvia, or that has its own Soviet. Baku in what is now Azerbaijan, that has its own Soviet. There's 400 of them by June, and that's very important because the Soviet itself, or the idea of the Soviet, is clearly representative of the people, shall we say, and is used by the Bolsheviks later to sort of legitimize speaking for the people in ways which proves to be quite, well, for me, quite sad actually, considering how it goes. But anyway, so early in March we get the letters from afar. But before we get Lenin's letters from afar, we get from Switzerland, we have the return of leading Bolsheviks. So we have the return of Kamenev and Stalin. So Kamenev is kind of the leading Bolshevik in Petrograd at that time. He's a moderate. He believes that a socialist government is kind of around the corner for the republic. He likes the idea of getting, say, back together with, but making the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks one as the Social Democratic Party again. And he takes control of Pravda, the newspaper, which is the leading instrument of connecting with people at this time. Radio and television. Well, obviously television's miles away, but in terms of media, the newspaper, as far as I've read and understand, is the thing in Petrograd and in Russia at this time. So he starts to edit Pravda along with Stalin, who at this point is still, he's an old Bolshevik for sure. He's been around, but he's noted as nothing more than a grey blur by certain Bolsheviks who are keeping their memoirs at the time. So he's not seen as anybody who is going to go on and lead the party in any way. So Kamenev advocates in Pravda for essentially a policy of conditional support for the provisional government, and he wants a reconciliation with the Mensheviks. And in relation to the policy in the war, he wants there to be, disorganizing activities, as it says here, to frustrate the orders from the officers on the front, to sort of prove to them that things might work differently. Now, this is incredibly different to what Lenin has in mind. So Lenin is in Switzerland, as you may have seen from various documentaries, famously receives the newspaper that demonstrates to him that the February Revolution has happened, thinking that it would never have happened in his lifetime, actually, that the moment had passed. And so furiously takes up his pen and writes to the Bolshevik Central Committee about how he thinks the party should be organised and what its policies should be. And I mean, what did he say? So he said no. We should be fundamentally against the war. It shouldn't just be disorganising activities. We need to stop the war, and there should be no speak of defence of the fatherland, because Lenin's Marxism, was as Marx advocated, didn't see the nation as something to be. The nation was only useful insofar as it delivered class revolution. So Lenin's fundamentally an internationalist, which links to the fourth point here, that this the objective should be an international proletarian revolution. That's what everything should be aiming towards. They should reject a reunification with the Mensheviks, because the Mensheviks cannot deliver that. They are, it seems, backing the provisional government, and also, are because they back the provisional government, they want to still collude with the bourgeoisie, because they want to go through what the Mensheviks saw was the bourgeois democratic revolution, as we saw in the first part. And most importantly here, and you will see this keep coming back time and time again, the way in which Lenin thought that the Bolsheviks could achieve power was through gaining a majority of Bolsheviks in all the various different Soviets throughout the Republic. So convincing people to vote Bolshevik, or to ally themselves with the Bolsheviks, to therefore promote Bolshevik policy if in the Soviets. And Kamenev and a lot of the old Bolsheviks, so a lot of the people that had been there since the split from 1903, they were amazed by this, really. they were stunned by his intransigence, as I put here. So his inability or seeming refusal to budge at all on these policy issues, and they were stunned by how, what he had claimed about how they'd handled the party, which obviously he was not happy with, pushing it to the right. And they only published one of these letters, and they edited it heavily. Ironically, Lenin had no idea what was actually happening in Russia at this time. He thought that Nicholas II was actually rallying, loyalist, monarchist troops to try and make a counter-revolution, not knowing obviously that the monarchy had literally dissolved. But I think it's important to truly know that, because Lenin was constantly thinking about counter-revolution, and the protection of the revolution was, even when he did bring about the seizure of power, this idea of counter-revolutions, clearly been present in his mind the whole time. But yeah, as we can see, he's already calling for the second stage of the revolution. No one else is asking for this. So, as we know, you may have seen, it's a kind of miraculous story. A couple of weeks later, he manages to make his way back to Petrograd. He is famously delivered back into the city by the Germans, who believe that he will be a disruptive force. He's this kind of one of these leading minds from the left, very, very, very. Well, he's quite hardcore thinker, isn't he? And they thought that if they delivered Lenin back in, that he would essentially bring down the Russian war effort. Obviously, it transpired to be completely the opposite to that. But yeah, so Lenin was met at Finland Station in the evening. Long journey. Here's Zinoviev, who's come back with him as well, another very important Bolshevik, as you will see, along with Kamenev later on in the course. He's greeted by music, as you can see here. We've got the Kronstadt sailors, we've got soldiers, which you can note by their bandoliers, we've got workers, we've got reporters. It's a kind of jubilant scene. He arrives back into the middle of. You got an image here, a painting later of him being sort of hoisted on people's shoulders as the great man returning. I'm not sure that he was particularly happy when he did return. Seems like he more had business on his mind and wanted to follow up, and immediately set about delivering what he'd already spoken about as being important for his policy. Apparently, when Kamenev greets him in the train, he immediately castigates him. He tells him, what was this that you were, writing in the in Pravda? This is ridiculous. And when he gets out of the train, he's brought into a building nearby, one of the Tsar's rooms by the station, and Kedze, one of the chairman of the Soviet at that time, greets him. He apparently makes this big speech saying, we need unity together. The Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks need to come together, in order to defend the revolution, not to push it on, to defend even this part of it. And yeah, obviously Lenin's got no time for this at all. Apparently doesn't even actually honour Chkheidze with a response directly to himself. He directs himself out on this balcony, I believe, or if not a balcony, at least speaks to the various soldiers, sailors and workers and citizens that are there around him, shouting that a worldwide socialist revolution was imminent, was soon going to happen, and he immediately denounces the war, calls it a shameful imperialist slaughter, and again his his Marxism shining through here, seeing the war as nothing but the playing out of imperial capitalist interests and nothing to do with traditional sort of global policy, geopolitical policy, that's what I mean. Alright, so 2 days later, he has to start convincing his party to come round to the way that he is thinking, and famously thunders at his party, stalking around this mansion. So the Ksershinskaya mansion used to be the mansion of a noblewoman, very Art Deco, beautiful mansion. This is what's taken over by the actually was also inhabited by Ivan Dornovo, who was the man who made the prophecy before World War One about what it would end in, and the Bolsheviks take this over as their own, and he essentially, he speaks directly against Kamenev's policy of trying to of watchfulness or support in any way for the provisional government. He thinks that the revolution needs to be pushed, that it's not about waiting now, and he's, again, as I said before, he's against the continuation of the war for this revolutionary defences, and we won't go into that term too much, but what he means there is, fighting in the war should not be justified as a preservation of the revolution. He thinks that's outrageous, and he doesn't think that there's been enough discipline in the party, and this idea of party unity again goes on later to justify a lot of Bolshevik policy once they take power. Forgot to mention as well, there's supposed to be a meeting for unity with the Mensheviks the day after, I believe, and that is not, that's completely scuppered by this, obviously, because Lenin's policy is just so hardcore. So, he's had a go at his party, and then a couple of days later, he is at the Soviet in the Taurida Palace. Here he is, and he essentially reads out what go on to be his April theses, which we're going to look at in a second, which again are about loosely no collusion or no support for the provisional government. He's the idea of essentially skipping the second stage of bourgeois democratic revolution. Either way, we're going to come to those in a second. He's labelled a madman by a lot of the Mensheviks. Skobelev here tells Milyukov, who's the Minister for War at that time, that Lenin's lunatic ideas disqualify him from danger. They think he's just this guy on the sidelines now. Lvov's told that he's a has-been, and Chkheidze, thinks that essentially he's so far out on the left, he's so hardcore that he will remain a solitary figure outside the revolution, and everyone else will go their own way. And he's accused by Tsereteli, who will later become the chairman of the Soviet, of essentially breaking with Marx. Now he's kind of he's accused of making Marx up, or at least interpreting him in a way which is not true to what Marx wrote. So what were the April theses? They are really, really, really integral, I say document, but integral ideas here. Number one, no support for the provisional government. Number two, clean break with the Mensheviks, so in no way getting back with them. Number three, all workers should be armed. Well, these are the most significant demands from them. Number four, transfer of all power to the Soviets. So they should be, Soviets as their own democratic model should be running the republic for themselves, and in their own areas, of course, and immediate peace. So the only party to want the war to end. From these theses, we see some of the key Bolshevik slogans. We see peace, land and bread, which is incredibly effective in terms of engaging with the populace, especially in Petrograd at large. Really simple and easy to connect with. All power to the Soviets, down with imperialist policy, down with the provisional government. These slogans will keep returning later on. However, just to show that this wasn't just some march forwards like Lenin. Lenin's April theses were just accepted by everybody. Even within Bolshevik majority Soviets, and even within the Bolshevik Central Committee, people have serious issues with these, even though they do get accepted. So in Saratov and Kiev, the Soviets there, they're rejected by the Soviets there. They say Lenin's been out of the country for 16 years. How can he have any idea about what's best for Russia? He's out of touch with things. As I put there again, Zinoviev, who travelled with him, called them perplexing. And Kamenev, at the same time as publishing the April theses, by the way, this is then in Pravda, at the same time publishes a letter called Our Disagreement, which distances the Bolsheviks from Lenin's, he calls them Lenin's personal opinions. So yeah, they did not agree that the bourgeois democratic stage of the revolution had just already been completed by the fact that the provisional government was in power. What were Lenin's theoretical justifications for the theses? We're coming to the end of this section here. Well, he maintained that because the peasantry were such a powerful revolutionary force, that they could essentially be considered as the proletariat because of their own consciousness of their class within that hierarchy. His second justification was that because the workers had already sort of taken power or owned power through the Soviets in Petrograd, and because they were the driving force for the revolution, there wasn't any need for this, middle class dominated stage where you still have the bourgeoisie around, and then you move through and topple them from there. And he had this kind of theory of the weakest link. So, because Russia was arguably the nation on earth that was least ready for a revolution, it would actually bring down capitalism there first, and therefore essentially have this domino effect around the world, causing all other more advanced capitalist nations for their proletariat to rise up and for them to have their own revolution. That was the idea. So that's April. At the end of April, and this is where we're going to leave this section, but this is where the provisional government starts to kind of creak. It gets leaked by the ex-cadet leader Milyukov, a telegram to the allies of Russia in the war at that time. And this telegram suggests that the provisional government is going to continue to support the allies, and that if World War if World War One is successful for the allies, that Russia demands some of the areas of the Ottoman Empire. Now this sparks outrage. It goes to show further, especially in a city which has got so many militant workers and soldiers in it, the idea of continuing the war is so unpopular that we have immediately tens of thousands of Bolsheviks and other parties in the streets against this. We have what's known as the April Days. They're shouting Bolshevik slogans: down with imperialist policy, down with the provisional government. And this is where support for the Bolsheviks starts to grow. It's the Soviet which manages to put the demonstration down, so once again highlighting the power of the Soviet over the Duma element of the government. And yeah, interestingly, Lenin does not actually yet back the use of down with the provisional government, because he can even see at this point that the Bolsheviks don't actually have enough of an ability to take power yet. He's very, very clever, an intelligent politician in that way. but all the same, that's what starts to get the Bolsheviks on their side. Also important to mention that, again, it's not all socialists that were pushing at this point. There was a counter demonstration which was supporting the war the day after. So, but this is important for us to understand. And so, as a result of this, Milyukov and Guchkov resign, and we leave this here with a reshuffling of the provisional government and who comes in, and a new phase of this second section, where we're going to look at essentially Kerensky's impact on this year. Thanks a lot, guys.